Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly MMA Cycles update. This is Gianni DePoce, and it is a pleasure, as always, to be with you all. This week, we are joined by special guest and a student of the Merriman Market Timing Academy, Pouyan Zolfagharnia. Hello, Pouyan. How are you?
Hi, Gianni. Pleasure to be here. How are you?
Good, good. I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to have you on board with us today. We're going to ask you some questions about some of the research you've been doing within our Timing Academy. But before we do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I come from a background of accounting, actually. That's where I started. I did accounting and finance at university, and I was fascinated by the finance modules that we were studying. But it was predominantly fundamental analysis. We were never really taught any technical analysis or anything else beyond that. And for that reason, I always struggled when I was investing in the markets until I discovered astrology back in 2012. And a lot of astrology was very much self-taught and through a mentor that I learned a lot of it. And I had this, what I felt was a unique idea where I could try to forecast markets or commodities using astrology. And I thought it was a novel idea and I'll be the only one doing it in the world. But soon realized actually there's a whole community out there that are decades, if not lifetimes ahead of me. And that's how I came across Ray and yourself and started the MMTA journey.
Well, indeed, that's a great story, Pouyan. And I followed a similar path, thought I discovered something brand new. And then I found someone like Ray and I was like, wow, this is pretty amazing to see someone who spent a lifetime doing what he has. So I have a couple important questions for you. But before we get to those, Pouyan, I do want to review what happened in the last week across several markets for our viewers. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. We're looking at a chart of the Dow Jones. Stocks were down last week again, with tech and growth segments of the market leading the way lower. So the Dow held up the best, but we had a shortened trading week. And we did give back all of Thursday's gains and closed lower on the day. So the Dow finished lower. If we look at the NASDAQ, we see that it closed out near the lows of the week. So a much weaker close compared to the Dow. And again, this plays into the theme that we discussed last week with the planet of Saturn being in the sign of Aquarius. And we know that whatever sign Saturn is transiting has a tendency to depress prices in sectors related to that sign. So Aquarius rules technology. And so we're seeing the tech sector of the market underperform after being a market leader for really the past decade or so. I also want to take a look at the chart of crude oil because crude oil had a really strong week, closed out near the highs of the week, which is pretty bullish. And this happened after the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. Prices actually formed a low the day before this, one of the major aspects of the year, the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in Pisces. And prices accelerated into the end of the week. We also had Mars, the fiery planet of Mars, enter into Pisces, which we talked about a proverbial lighting of a fire under the sign of Pisces, which rules crude oil along with Jupiter and Neptune, and prices indeed exploded higher. So that's what happened in the energy market. Gold and silver put in decent gains for the week, but on Thursday gave some of those gains back. And we closed a little bit lower. I'm looking at silver here. So that's pretty much what happened in the market last week. There was actually one more sector that I wanted to look at, and it's actually the dry shipping sector. We haven't talked about this before, but I thought it was pretty interesting given the Jupiter and Neptune conjunction, because we have that in the sign of Pisces, and Pisces, in Greek mythology is Poseidon, the ruler of the sea. So it's interesting because Jupiter rules long distance trade and travel. And a lot of these shipping companies are transporting dry goods across vast distances. So that whole Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in the sign of Pisces, I think, is also manifesting through a pretty powerful rally in the global shipping sector which was not doing well for many years. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of what I was looking at this past week. Now, Pouyan, do you have any thoughts on what I just said before I get into the questions I have for you?
Yeah, I was going to say it's really interesting with the transit of the Sun through Pisces as well. I know in the news that we had here in the UK, one of the items that came up was P&O ferries, and they essentially had to get rid of all of their staff, and they pretty much got rid of them via video call. So that hit the front line, and they were asked to come in to explain themselves to the politicians, and that really hit the front lines. And we also had, I think, for several weeks since the Russian invasion, we've had yachts being confiscated from Russian oligarchs, and that's been front page news for several weeks. And it was just interesting to see how you've got Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces, and the Sun was also transiting and transferring that energy, and how there was just a lot of news regarding the shipping industry and yachts, and apart from what we're looking at in terms of crude oil.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point that you make there, Pouyan. So first question I have from you, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the research you've done with MMTA and some of the geocosmic correlations you've discovered in your research?
Certainly. So I started, we started the course in 2020, and one of the, 2021, January 2021 we started. But when I was looking at which areas I'd like to study, it was copper. It was one of the markets that wasn't specifically covered. And when we were asked to choose a commodity, it's myself and a fellow student, Matthew, who actually writes all the reports from MMTA on copper. We picked copper, and we started our studies together on this commodity. And it was fascinating because at the time we started it back in 2021, it had already started rallying very strongly, as had most commodities and assets. And we felt copper was going to make new highs as a leading indicator towards the general economic sentiment. It was interesting to see how rapidly copper was rallying at the time. And when we started to look at it in detail, especially the long-term cycles and the geocosmics involved, we found copper correlated very strongly to Saturn's cycles and aspects that Saturn formed, and the retrograde activity around Saturn. They all correlated really strongly to the price activity of copper. And it was interesting because it was actually Matthew who told me in our first call that copper it has a nickname of Dr. Copper because it's a strong leading indicator for what the economic trends will be. So it was fascinating to see how copper carried on to rally and did form all-time highs. I think we've had almost like a triple top now with copper, and the high was formed around early March, around the 7th of March, I think it was.
Indeed. And you know what's fascinating about the copper market too is, there's a lot of talk nowadays, with the crypto revolution of Uranus's transit through Taurus, but we know that the planet that rules copper is actually Venus. And so, we're seeing that boom part of the boom bust cycle with Uranus's transit through Taurus unfold now. And so we can't spoil it for, your research's sake, but we do know that at some point a high will form in copper. And as you said, it's a great economic indicator, nickname being Dr. Copper. So Pouyan, I do want to ask, what are some of the other markets on your radar? Any countries or sectors, or even any geocosmics coming up that you think are worth highlighting?
Sure. So I think for several months now, we've been writing about the intermediate cycle that's unfolding in the equity markets, and that, I would say, most equity markets around the world were supposed to make their 2020 3-month low, and some of them have occurred, some of them are unfolding, and that's an area where I've been personally investing into, hoping for a rally to pursue. And also I've done some studies around silver and precious metals, and kind of layering that on top of what Ray has already done on gold and silver. And I'm looking for some strong shorting opportunities to come up in those markets. I've always really gone long on a lot of markets. I haven't really probed the short side that much. I guess because I really got more serious in trading around 2020, and everything's just been rallying, so it's been quite comfortable and easy to do that. But I think to really prove the value in all these studies and what we've done would be to actually benefit from shorting opportunities as well, and that's something that I see coming up in the next few months, I would say.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you for sharing that. I do want to touch on some of the geocosmic signatures approaching this upcoming week. And then unfortunately, as long as I could talk to you, Pouyan, we are running out of time. So we will have a sextile between Venus and Uranus unfold on Monday, April 18th. And the same day, the sun will form a square aspect to Pluto. So keep an eye on perhaps interest rate related markets or Forex markets around that time, because Pluto rules debt and Venus rules currencies. And we know it's been a big change over the last several years that interest rates have been rising very sharply. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And then the following day on April 19th, we will begin the second third of spring when the sun ingresses into the sign of Taurus. So that's all that we have in terms of big aspects coming up in the week ahead. Just a couple brief announcements before we call it a video here. We did publish the monthly MMA cycles report this past week. We updated our readers on a plethora of markets, stock markets, commodity markets, currency markets. So I would encourage you to check that out. We will also have your addendum to the MMA cycles report, Pouyan. That gets published next week. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Well, I think it's actually the Monday after.
The week after?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. In any event, that information is available at www.mmacycles.com. And of course, we have the part 2 of the MMA webinar series that will be on May 8th. So definitely mark your calendars for that, and additional details can be found at www.mmacycles.com. So Pouyan, any last words?
No, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure to spend the time with you.
Thank you, and thanks for joining me, and we'll definitely have you back in the near future. Thanks.
That'd be lovely. Take care. All the best.